The vanishing village of Anjikuni Lake. The air was biting cold as I trudged through the snow-laden forest, my breath visible in the moonlit night. The stories I'd heard about Anjikuni Lake whispered in my mind like ghostly voices on the wind, drawing me deeper into the frozen wilderness of northern Canada. I was a journalist back then, chasing stories like any good reporter. But this time, it wasn't just any story, I was chasing a legend. In the 1930s, an entire Inuit village near Anjikuni Lake vanished without a trace. The idea had fascinated me since childhood, and I decided to finally unravel the mystery myself. Local legends spoke of spirits and curses, of something ancient and unspeakable lurking beneath the icy waters. But I wasn't one to be deterred by myths. I was determined to find the truth, no matter what. The night was eerily silent, the only sounds my own footsteps crunching in the snow. I felt a strange unease as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. My guide, an old Inuit man named Elek, walked ahead, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the ground. He was a man of few words, his face etched with the lines of many winters. "The village," Elek said, his voice barely above a whisper, "it is cursed." "Cursed?" I echoed, intrigued by his sudden willingness to speak. Elek's father was a boy when the village vanished. He said they heard voices in the wind. The spirits were angry. I wanted to press him for more details, but his silence was a barrier I couldn't break. We walked on in silence, my mind racing with possibilities. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at the edge of the lake. The moon hung high, casting an ethereal glow over the frozen expanse. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The village was there, or at least what was left of it. Abandoned huts stood like skeletal remains, their empty doorways gaping like open mouths. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the snow crunching loudly beneath my boots. I peered into one of the huts, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Everything was just as it had been left, a pot on the stove, clothes neatly folded, food left uneaten. It was as if the villagers had vanished into thin air. "Elek, this is incredible," I said, turning to find him gone. My heart skipped a beat. "Elek?" The shadows seemed to close in around me, and I felt a sudden wave of panic. I called out again, my voice echoing eerily in the stillness. There was no answer. Just then, I heard it, a low, mournful sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was a wail, distant and haunting, like a chorus of the damned. I spun around, my flashlight beam bouncing off the snow. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a primal fear grip me. It was as if the very air was vibrating with an unearthly energy. Suddenly, there was a rustling in the shadows, and my heart leapt into my throat. I turned just in time to see a figure lurching toward me from the darkness. My flashlight caught a glimpse of its twisted form, a gaunt, hollow-eyed creature with skin stretched taut over its bones. Its mouth hung open in a silent scream, and its eyes were pools of darkness. I stumbled back, tripping over a hidden root and landing hard on the ground. The creature loomed over me, its breath a cold, foul wind. Just as I was sure it would devour me, it vanished, leaving only a whisper of cold air behind. Breathing heavily, I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The village seemed alive with shadows, and I realized I wasn't alone. There were more of them, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I felt trapped, surrounded by the unseen. "Elek!" I shouted, desperately hoping he would appear and save me from whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. But there was only silence, an oppressive, suffocating silence that weighed heavy on my soul. In the distance, I saw a flicker of movement, a shape moving through the shadows. I forced myself to follow, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The figure was indistinct, flitting between the trees like a ghost. I followed it, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it be one of the villagers? Or something far worse? As I pursued the figure deeper into the forest, I felt the air grow colder, the shadows deeper. The forest was alive with whispers, voices that seemed to call my name, promising answers and threatening doom. I knew then that I had stepped into something beyond my understanding, a world where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. And in that moment, I realized that this was only the beginning. The true horror of Anjikuni Lake had yet to reveal itself. The mystery of the vanished village was unfolding before my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. But I knew one thing for certain: I had to survive to tell the tale. Whatever secrets the lake held, I would uncover them, even if it meant facing the darkness itself. As I pushed deeper into the woods, the shadows closed in around me, and the night grew colder. I was about to discover the truth behind the legend, a truth that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The forest blurred around me as I sprinted through the snow, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The wails of the vanished villagers echoed in my ears, and the icy grip of their skeletal hands seemed to linger on my skin. I could feel their presence behind me, a creeping dread that pushed me forward, even as my body begged for rest. I stumbled, my foot catching on a hidden root, and I fell hard into the snow. The world spun, and I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, my breath forming frantic clouds in the icy night. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat of panic. From somewhere in the forest, I heard a rustling, a crackle of branches breaking underfoot. The villagers were drawing closer, their ghostly forms flitting between the trees. I struggled to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins. I had to keep moving, had to find safety, had to escape the nightmare that was closing in around me. But where could I go? The forest was a maze of shadows and whispers, and I had long since lost my sense of direction. I glanced around desperately, searching for any sign of escape, when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, just beyond the trees. It was the first light of dawn, a pale promise of safety and warmth. Driven by hope, I pushed forward, each step a battle against the cold and the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. The light grew brighter, a beacon cutting through the darkness, and I followed it, my heart pounding with each stride. As I neared the edge of the forest, the trees began to thin, revealing a wide, open field. At its center stood a lone figure, silhouetted against the rising sun. It was Alec, the guide who had vanished without a trace. "Alec!" I called out, my voice hoarse and trembling. He turned, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice heavy with a burden I couldn't understand. "It's too late for us." "What do you mean?" I demanded, desperate for answers. "What happened to the village?" Alec hesitated, his gaze shifting to the forest behind me. "We angered the spirits," he said, his voice a whisper on the wind. "They took us. They took everything." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Alec wasn't just a guide, he was one of them, one of the vanished villagers trapped between life and death. And I was standing on the threshold of their world, a world where the spirits reigned supreme. "You must leave," Alec said urgently, stepping forward. "Before they take you too." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I turned to flee, but as I did, I felt a cold, clammy hand grasp my arm. I spun around, expecting to see one of the villagers, but what I saw was far more terrifying. The ground beneath me was shifting, rippling like water. The shadows coalesced into a single, monstrous form, rising from the earth like a living nightmare. It was the spirit of the lake, a creature of darkness and despair, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. I tried to pull away, but its grip was unyielding. The ground opened up beneath me, a gaping maw of blackness that threatened to swallow me whole. I could hear the screams of the villagers, their voices a cacophony of anguish and despair. "Alec, help me!" I cried, panic lacing my words. But Alec stood frozen, his eyes locked on the creature. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't. This is our fate." The creature lunged forward, its mouth opening wide to consume me. I fought desperately, clawing at the snow, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. The darkness closed in, suffocating and all-encompassing. Just as I felt myself slipping away, a blinding light erupted from the horizon, a beam of pure, radiant energy. It struck the creature, driving it back, its shriek of fury echoing across the landscape. I was blinded by the brilliance, my senses overwhelmed by the intensity of the light. When I finally regained my vision, the creature was gone, its form dissipated into the ether. The field was empty, save for Alec, who stood watching me with a mixture of relief and sadness. "The spirits are appeased, for now," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. but they will never truly rest. Not until we are all forgotten. I took a shaky breath, the weight of the encounter settling over me. The village of Anjikuni Lake was lost, its people trapped in a cycle of suffering and despair. And I had come dangerously close to sharing their fate. As the first rays of the sun warmed my face, I knew I had to leave this place, to return to the world of the living and share the story of what I had witnessed. But the horrors of Anjikuni Lake would haunt me forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of reality. I turned away from the field, my heart heavy with the knowledge that some mysteries were never meant to be uncovered. The spirits of Anjikuni Lake had claimed their victims, and I was lucky to have escaped their grasp. But as I made my way back through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still watching, waiting for its next chance to strike. Back in civilization, the ordeal at Anjikuni Lake felt like a distant nightmare, yet the memories clung to me like shadows I couldn't shake. I returned to my small, cluttered apartment in Winnipeg, determined to write the story of what I had witnessed. But every time I sat at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, I hesitated. How could I put into words the unspeakable terror of that night? Days turned into weeks, and the encounter weighed heavily on my mind. The visions of the vanishing villagers and the monstrous spirit haunted my dreams, their chilling whispers echoing in the corners of my consciousness. Despite the safety of my home, I felt a lingering sense of unease, as if something had followed me back from the lake. Late one night, as a storm raged outside, I sat in my living room, poring over the notes I had taken. The pages were filled with sketches of the village, frantic scribbles detailing the horrors I had seen. But none of it seemed real, as though the experience was a figment of my imagination. As I sifted through the pages, something caught my eye, a drawing I didn't remember making. It depicted a grotesque creature with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, emerging from the lake's depths. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the monstrous spirit from that night. How had this appeared in my notes? My hands shook as I tossed the pages aside, a chill running down my spine. The lights flickered, casting the room into momentary darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, the storm's howling winds rattling the windows. When the lights came back on, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The words "we are waiting" were scrawled across my wall in what appeared to be dripping black ink. My heart pounded as I backed away, my mind racing. How could this be happening? Was I losing my grip on reality? Desperate for answers, I reached out to Matthew, the man I had encountered in the woods. I needed to understand what was happening to me, why the spirits seemed to be reaching out even from afar. I found Matthew in a small town not far from the lake, living in a rundown cabin at the edge of a dense forest. He greeted me with a weary nod, his eyes reflecting the weight of knowledge he carried. "They've marked you," he said without preamble, his voice grave. "The spirits don't easily let go of those who trespass into their domain." "Why me?" I asked, my voice laced with desperation. "I didn't mean to disturb them." Matthew sighed, his gaze distant. "Intent doesn't matter. Once you're part of their world, they can reach you anywhere." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I struggled to suppress a wave of panic. "What can I do? How do I get rid of them?" "There's a ritual," Matthew said, his voice a whisper. "It's dangerous, but it might sever their connection to you. It requires returning to the lake, to face the spirits one last time." My heart sank at the thought of returning to that cursed place. But I knew there was no other choice. I had to confront the darkness if I wanted any chance of freeing myself from its grasp. Before I could ask Matthew more about the ritual, the wind outside picked up, howling through the trees like a living entity. A series of loud bangs shook the cabin, as if something was trying to force its way in. Matthew paled, his eyes darting to the windows. "They know you're here," he said, urgency in his voice. "We must act quickly." He hurried to a small chest in the corner of the room, retrieving a bundle wrapped in worn cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a set of ancient symbols carved into thin pieces of bone. "These are talismans," he explained, pressing them into my hand. "They'll protect you from the spirits, but only for a short time." I nodded, clutching the talismans tightly as I felt the weight of our situation pressing down on me. Together, we made our way through the storm, the wind lashing at us like a living beast. The path to the lake was treacherous, but we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was my only chance to escape the spirit's grasp. The lake loomed before us, shrouded in mist and shadows. The air was thick with the feeling of malevolence, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching our every move. Matthew led me to the shore, where he began to prepare for the ritual. He traced a circle in the snow, setting the talismans around its perimeter. The wind howled, and the ground beneath us seemed to tremble with anticipation. "Stand in the circle," Matthew instructed, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Whatever happens, don't leave it until the ritual is complete." I stepped into the circle, my heart racing as I watched Matthew begin to chant in a language I didn't understand. The symbols on the talismans began to glow with an eerie light, and I felt a strange energy building around me. The lake roiled, the water churning as if alive. Shadows rose from the depths, coalescing into forms that writhed and twisted, their hollow eyes fixed on me. The spirits had awakened, and they were not pleased. Matthew's chanting grew louder, his voice carrying over the storm as he continued the ritual. The spirits surged forward, their mouths open in silent screams, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I held my ground, focusing on Matthew's voice. The talismans pulsed with energy, forming a barrier between me and the encroaching darkness. But the spirits were relentless, their fury a palpable force. They clawed at the barrier, their spectral hands reaching for me with a desperate hunger. I could feel their rage, their desire to drag me into the depths of the lake. The wind howled, and the ground shook with a violent tremor. The spirits pressed closer, their whispers growing louder, filling my mind with their chilling promises of doom. Just as I felt the barrier beginning to falter, Matthew shouted the final words of the ritual, his voice cutting through the chaos. The talismans blazed with light, and a wave of energy exploded outward, driving the spirits back with a deafening roar. The darkness receded, the spirits dissolving into mist and shadow. The lake grew still, the storm abating as if the world itself had taken a breath. I stumbled forward, exhausted but alive, my heart pounding with relief. Matthew stepped into the circle, his eyes filled with both triumph and sorrow. "You're free," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But remember, the spirits never truly forget. They may let you go, but their memory lingers." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I had survived the ordeal, but the encounter had left its mark on my soul. The story of Anjikuni Lake would live on, a chilling testament to the darkness that lay hidden beneath the surface. As we made our way back through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were still watching, their whispers a haunting reminder of the horrors I had faced. But I knew I had to move forward, to share the story of what I had witnessed and ensure that others never made the same mistake. The lake had claimed its victims, and I was lucky to have escaped its grasp. But the true terror of Anjikuni Lake was far from over. The journey back to civilization was filled with a sense of uneasy triumph. Matthew and I had succeeded in breaking the spirit's curse, but the lingering shadows of the forest reminded me that some horrors never truly die. As we emerged from the woods and returned to civilization, I hoped that I had left the spirits behind for good. Back in Winnipeg, the world felt different, as though a weight had been lifted. The city was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness of Anjikuni. I resumed my work at the newspaper, my articles on the vanishing village gaining widespread attention. Yet, even as I wrote, a small voice in the back of my mind warned me that the story wasn't over. For weeks, things were quiet. I buried myself in my work, trying to forget the horrors I had faced. But the world seemed to conspire against me, the shadows creeping back into my life in small, insidious ways. Lights flickered in my apartment, the air grew cold, and I felt a persistent sense of being watched. One night, as I sat at my desk, reviewing my notes for yet another article, the phone rang again. My heart skipped a beat as I picked up the receiver, half expecting the same chilling voice from before. Instead, it was Matthew, his voice laced with urgency. "You need to come back," he said, his words tinged with fear. "There's something you need to see." Dread settled in my stomach as I listened to him explain. Strange occurrences had begun to happen around the lake, sightings of shadowy figures, whispers in the night, and an unnatural chill that clung to the air. The villagers may have been freed, but the spirits still lingered, their malevolence undiminished. Reluctantly, I agreed to return. The thought of facing the darkness again filled me with dread, but I knew I couldn't turn my back on the story. There was more to uncover, and I was determined to see it through. As I approached Anjikuni Lake once more, the familiar sense of foreboding returned. The landscape was shrouded in mist, and the wind carried an eerie whisper that seemed to echo my name. Matthew was waiting for me at the edge of the forest, his expression grim. "We need to act quickly," he said, leading me toward the lake. "The spirits are growing stronger. There's something they want, and we need to find out what it is." Together, we ventured back into the heart of the forest, retracing our steps to the ancient altar. The path felt different, more oppressive, as though the trees themselves were conspiring against us. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, and I felt a chill that went deeper than the cold air. As we reached the glade, the altar loomed before us, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the air was thick with anticipation. Matthew began the ritual again, his voice steady and resolute. I joined him, our words merging into a powerful incantation that resonated through the forest. The amulet, cradled in Matthew's hands, glowed with a fierce light, pushing back the encroaching darkness. But this time, something was different. The shadows didn't retreat, instead, they swirled around us, coalescing into a massive form that towered above the trees. It was the spirit, more powerful than ever, its eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. The creature lunged toward us, its monstrous form a maelstrom of rage and despair. The ground shook with its approach, and I felt a primal fear grip me, the realization that we might not survive this final encounter. Matthew shouted a warning, and we scattered, the spirit's roar echoing through the glade. The amulet slipped from his grasp, landing at the edge of the altar, its glow flickering like a dying flame. In that moment, everything seemed to slow. I knew what I had to do, the realization crystallizing in my mind. The spirits weren't just seeking revenge, they were trapped, their anguish a never-ending cycle of torment. The amulet was the key, not just to their power but to their salvation. I dove for the amulet, grasping it tightly as the spirit closed in. Its eyes bore into mine, a void of endless suffering that threatened to consume me. But I refused to back down, my resolve firm as I raised the amulet, its light blazing with renewed intensity. With every ounce of strength, I spoke the final words of the ritual, my voice rising above the cacophony of the spirit's fury. The amulet pulsed with a radiant energy, the light enveloping the glade and driving back the shadows. The spirit let out a deafening wail, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. The ground shook violently, the air crackling with energy as the spirit was torn asunder, its presence fading into nothingness. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The forest fell silent, the oppressive weight of the spirit's curse lifted at last. The amulet lay dormant in my hand, its power spent, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me, the burden of the past finally released. Matthew approached, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. "It's done," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've freed them." I nodded, my heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. The story of Anjikuni Lake had come to an end, the darkness vanquished at last. But I knew that the memory of what I had faced would stay with me, a haunting reminder of the shadows that lurked in the world's forgotten corners. As we made our way back through the forest, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had survived the horrors of Anjikuni Lake, faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But more than that, I had ensured that the spirit's tale would live on, a testament to the unseen forces that shape our world. Back in Winnipeg, I completed my article, detailing the final chapter of the Anjikuni mystery. The world would know the truth, and perhaps in understanding, the spirit's memory would finally find peace. Yet, as I sat in my apartment, the familiar city sounds a comforting backdrop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered just beyond the edge of perception. A whisper in the wind, a shadow in the corner of my vision. The spirits of Anjikuni Lake had been freed, but the world was still full of mysteries, of unseen forces waiting to be uncovered. And I, armed with the knowledge of the darkness I had faced, was ready to seek them out. For the true horror of Anjikuni Lake was not just the spirits themselves, but the realization that some mysteries are never truly solved, that the darkness is always watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And in the depths of the night, As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden, waiting to be discovered. The end.